Hello YouTube, welcome back to StoneCabinAdventures and episode 11, the sequel, no, part two, take two, that's what it is. I was listening to it today and I'm like, wait, what did I say? Anyway, somewhere Kevin is teaching me how to do this YouTube, Filmora, all that stuff, and I think I cut out a paragraph I wasn't supposed to cut out. So I'm gonna re-video this. Like, subscribe, ring the notification bell. It is a cold evening in Arkansas, and I hope to have episode 12 out within the next day or two also. But we're gonna redo episode 11. So here we go. Here's Pinky. I'm sorry, Pinky, I don't know a way to find out if you have any broken bones that won't hurt like the dickens. Doc patted my hand as he stared at my knee. He bent and twisted to get a good look at my knee without touching it. Can we wait on Pa? I pointed across the little room. You should take care of Rufus first. He bit the corner of his mouth. I don't know if your Pa plans to come to town. Did anyone head that way to tell your family? He looked over at Rufus. I followed his gaze. Rufus was missing some teeth and might be missing an eye. Miss Schwartz didn't fool around when she got mad. I liked her better all the time. I'll go. Where do they live? Miss Schwartz volunteered. Doc answered before I could. 12 miles south of town. But our horse is maybe pinned up out back of the school. I never even thought to look if Elmer rode Patches home. He would have left him here for me. Elmer can run for hours. He could have just run home. If you could get on Patches and give him a little kick, he would head straight for our barn. Sometimes I sleep most of the way home. He has a right smooth gallop. I don't suppose you have a side saddle on him. I shook my head. We ride bareback. Suddenly terrified by the thought that I'd have to stay all night here, alone with Rufus. My chin wiggled, and I had to work hard to stop it. Sleeping with rattlesnakes sounded less scary. She patted my head. Don't worry, Pinky. I'll do my best, shall I? She gave me a quick hug and left. To keep from looking at my knee, or Rufus's new, uglier face, I watched out the window. I saw Miss Schwartz riding astride Patches, leaving town at a lope. For the first time since I hopped back into the doctor's office, I felt a little bit of hope. She had gumption. I hadn't known that until today. Ma or Pa should be here by dark. I could even put up with Rufus that long, since he wasn't moving much. I smiled a tiny smile. Open your mouth. This should take the edge off the pain. What is it? It's called laudanum. It doesn't taste good at all. He put one drop of nasty stuff in my mouth. It tasted so horrid, I'd have washed my mouth out with tonic to get rid of the flavor. The next thing I knew, I was at home with my family, and my leg was all wrapped up tight with sticks holding my knee still. Some of the sticks still had leaves growing on them. Some leaves were growing out of my leg. For some reason, it didn't seem strange at all. I could see Rufus walking around in our house, but I could see through him. I didn't know if Rufus's ghost had showed up or if I was the ghost. Miss Schwartz sat at our table peeling rocks from Mr. Harkin's mine. Elmer and Pa had both turned into giant fish and wore necklaces made of my little gold hearts and rattles that they'd taken off of some huge snakes. Billy Joe showed up, and suddenly everyone had on a blue hat like his. Pa picked me up and put me on the dining room table, but then it changed into the table where Rufus had been laying. Pa and Mr. Harkin each grabbed one of my hands. Lay still, Pinky. This is going to hurt. I could still taste that nasty medicine. The whole room spun like a wound-up swing, except it whirled in slow motion. When it started swapping up for down, I held onto the table for all I was worth. Whoa! I could hear myself saying it. I wanted to yell it, but it only came out of my mouth stretched out, taking forever to say. Whoa! That medicine might have been good stuff, but when Doc grabbed my foot and pulled my leg back straight, no medicine in the world would have been good enough. My knee made a thunk noise, and Doc quit pulling. I'm going to splint this. Don't let her walk on it. I don't want her hopping on it either. Can you make her a pair of crutches? Mr. Harkin answered faster than Pa. I have a pair at my house. Found 'em in the mine when I bought it. I'll saw the legs off a few inches. They are already too short for me. Pa squeezed Mr. Harkin's shoulder and said, Thanks, John Thomas. I never even thought about Mr. Harkin having a real name. He'd always been Mr. Harkin. I wondered what Pa's name was. Ma's name was Caroline Grace. That's where I got my name. Nobody ever calls me Priscilla Grace, not even if I'm in big trouble. I made a note in my head to remember to ask Pa about his real name. Maybe I could find out what my teacher's name was. I couldn't even remember her last name. The next thing I knew, my leg woke me up. I lay on the settle. When I tried to stand up, Pa grabbed me and held me off the ground. Ma's outside. I'll carry you to her if you need to go to the outhouse. Holler when you want to come back in, and Elmer or I will come get you. Do not walk on that knee for at least a week. A whole week? 7 days. Today's day 1. Do not hop either. Do not let your foot touch the ground. Yesterday should. Pa put his finger on my mouth. In his mind, yesterday did not count toward the 7 days of no walking. Did Mr. Harkin bring me the crutches? Pa looked at me like he'd never seen me before. What crutches? The ones he found in his mind when he bought it. Remember, he said they were too little for him, but he could saw 'em off fine so they'd fit me. I couldn't believe Pa had already forgotten the conversation at Doc's place. One side of Pa's mouth smiled, but his eyes showed plain confusion. When did you see Mr. Harkin? I squeezed my eyes shut. Maybe it was here. It was when Doc pulled on my foot to straighten my knee. You called Mr. Harkin John Thomas. Pa chuckled. Mr. Harkin's name is Ezekiel Jones. I don't know where you got John Thomas. Well, what John Thomas were you talking to? Pa shook his head. I have no idea. Who all was here when Doc Fishface fixed my knee? You called someone John Thomas? No one was here. Doc and I were at his place. He paused for a moment. Mr. Gates was there. He sat with Rufus. He ignored us. But he helped you hold my shoulders to the table when Doc made my legs stretch back out. Pa looked at me in that tender way he does sometimes when he's going to spank my hind end, but he don't want to. Sweetheart, Doc didn't pull on your leg. He put some leeches on it to pull out the blood. He thought it might heal faster without bandages. You need to be careful. Unless it hurts, you can bend it a little. He didn't want it getting stiff. I inched up my nightdress to look at my knee. I'd seen it earlier. I didn't want to see any leeches. They are ugly. 6 bite marks from those leeches circled my kneecap. One of them still leaked a little. Pa set me down at the table, then pulled a clean hanky from his pocket and wiped away the drop of blood. Did you know that Mr. Harkin didn't buy his mine? He sat down at his place at the table. My eyes flew open wide. What? He said he did. When Doc asked you if you could make me a pair of crutches, he said a pair of them were in the mine when he bought it. Pa shook his head slowly. Elmer asked me if you needed a pair of crutches. That's when we were getting you out of the wagon and into the house. I shook my head and muttered, I don't remember riding in the wagon. He nodded and patted my hand. You did. We laid you out in the back, and Elmer had to stay back there with you to keep you from getting out to walk. He had to tie Patches on behind the wagon. Patches was not pleased with that. Mr. Harkin had been at Gosling's getting one of his tools fixed. He rode up front with me. I couldn't imagine wanting to walk home instead of riding. That medicine Doc gave me must have been powerful stuff. Hey, did Ma fry that rabbit for supper? I wanted her to teach Miss Schwartz how. Yes, Miss Schwartz stayed here with Ma when I went to town to bring you back. She helped with the chores since you weren't here to do yours. Elmer did his chores and most of mine before he caught Patches and rode into town. Ma caught up the slack. By the way, girl, you told us you'd already eaten supper with Doc and Rufus and Mr. Gates. You said the sheriff stopped by too, and that the governor died, and Abigail Kruger sang Rock of Ages at his funeral. That's when we figured out the pain medicine Doc gave you twisted up your brain. I pondered all Pa had said. I couldn't make sense of all of it. I tried to remember if I ate anything at Doc's, and all I could remember was Mr. Gates chopping Rufus's leg off and cutting it up into little pieces to feed to the Kruger's pig. I was pretty sure that hadn't happened. I needed to change the subject. I don't get it. How did Mr. Harkin get a mine if he didn't buy it? He couldn't have made it. God could have made it, but not Mr. Harkin. Pa chuckled at that. No, he didn't make it. Not alone, anyway. His pa and some friends bought it off an old prospector who wanted to go further west. They dug around a little bit and found some color. Mr. Harkin's pa bought out the others. Ezekiel worked with his pa for years. After his ma and pa passed, he kept working in the mine. He said he's got more gold out of that mine this year alone than in any other 5-year period. Is that enough information to satisfy you? I smiled at Pa. That's exactly what I wondered. I wondered who hauled all those millions of loads of dirt and rocks out. That's who, Pa nodded. It'd be a lot of work if one man did it all. It was a great deal of work for all the men who dug it out. Where is Miss Schwartz? Pa smiled before answering. Mr. Harkin and Elmer took her back into town in our wagon. Your boss may be sweet on your teacher. When he found out she'd hit Rufus with the broom, he smiled bigger than I've ever seen him smile. How many teeth did she knock out? Pa sighed, and then he sighed again. Pinky, Miss Schwartz said she was protecting you. I nodded. By then, she was. I tried to get someone big enough to tell Rufus to quit making her cry, but my skirt hung up and Rufus caught me. He dropped me on the floor and stepped on my leg. That was when teacher poked him with that broom. I giggled. He sounded just like Buddy Bacon when you're bringing him sour mash. All that grunting and snorting. Pa closed his eyes for a moment and breathed deep and slow. Ma always says he's commending his soul to God when he does that. He tapped his fingers on the table. Pinky, I'm going to ask you some hard questions. You have to tell me the absolute truth. If you can't tell me, or if you don't want to, just tell me that, okay? Well, I knew I couldn't talk myself out of a thrashing, but didn't know what I should have done different. I didn't quite know how to answer him. He never let me choose whether or not to answer before. Sure? I need to know exactly what you saw that made you think you needed to go get help. He kept running his hands through his hair and touching his sides where his guns hung when he wore them. That's all you want to know? Paul kind of stuttered. Yes. Well, that's easy. I seen Rufus had teacher trapped like. She tried to get away and erased most of my spelling words with the back of her dress. Was he touching her? I puzzled over that. That's kind of hard to say. When I got there, his hands were smearing the 4th grade words. His arms had her blocked, but not his hands. He wasn't letting her move. I nodded to myself. Yep, that's what I saw. Kind of like a fence. She didn't sound like she'd been crying, but tears ran down her face. That's what made me want to run and get help. If Elmer couldn't beat him up without I whack him with a stick, she couldn't either. So I thought I best get someone bigger than me and Miss Schwartz. Pa relaxed like he'd dropped off a 100-pound load. That's all you saw? I nodded. What did you hear? Oh, I heard him say he had what she wanted. He had given her that rabbit earlier, and she didn't want that. I didn't imagine he had anything she wanted. Ma snorted and ran out the room. Pa's face got red, and he shuddered. Am I getting a thrashing or not? Pa's eyebrows arched way up on his head. They do that more when he talks to me than any other time. Why would you get a thrashing? Because all the work I caused for everybody. No thrashing today. Rufus needs a thrashing, not you. You did a very brave thing. I smiled. Well, it's about time. Thank you so much for your patience with us as we learn this whole YouTube thing. There are a lot of good videos out there. I need to watch more of them. But thank you for listening. Like, subscribe, ring the notification bell, and come back in a couple of days and I'll have Pinky episode 12 ready for you. Thank you. Y'all be blessed. And remember, Jesus loves you. Mwah.